20 Reichsmarks, less than the cost of a decent dinner in Berlin. That was the price tag on the weapon that destroyed more Allied tanks than any cannon the Germans ever built. Not the famous 88mm, not the Panther's long gun, not even the Tiger's massive barrel. A cheap steel tube filled with black powder that a factory worker could stamp out in an afternoon. The Panzerfaust, tank fist. By the time the war ended in 1945, this disposable grenade launcher had knocked out thousands of Shermans, Churchills, and T-34s. In the closing months on the Western Front, it was responsible for up to 34% of all Allied tank casualties. Let that sink in. 1/3 of every tank lost, a weapon so simple that teenage boys in the Volkssturm learned to use it in 10 minutes. A weapon so crude it had no trigger, just a squeeze bar. A weapon so deadly that American paratroopers threw away their own bazookas and used captured Panzerfausts instead. How did a 20 Reichsmark II become Nazi Germany's most effective tank killer? Why did Allied crews fear it more than the legendary Tiger? And what happens when you put this kind of firepower in the hands of desperate men defending the rubble of their own cities? If you value documented World War II anti-tank warfare history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Army Operational Research Group Internal Memorandum No. 16, published in 1950, archived as WO 291/1186, and from Trevor Dupuy's Attrition Forecasting Battle. Casualties and equipment losses in modern war, published in 1990, along with combat reports from the U.S. First Army between June 1944 and May 1945, analyzing 797 medium tanks and 101 light tanks. Now back to the information. The Wehrmacht's standard anti-tank rifles bounce off sloped armor like pebbles. Magnetic mines require soldiers to run up and slap them on moving steel. The Panzerbuchse 39 anti-tank rifle can't penetrate a T-34 from any angle beyond 50 meters. German infantry are dying by the hundreds trying to stop tanks with weapons designed for an earlier war. The Heereswaffenamt, the Army Ordnance Office, sends an urgent request to the armaments industry in November 1942. Simple anti-tank weapon, cheap to produce, infantry portable, must penetrate 140 millimeters of armor. A 14-inch tube with a hollow charge bomb at one end and a small gunpowder charge in the center. The concept is simple. Recoilless gun. Fire the warhead forward while blast vents backward to cancel recoil. The shape charge principle wasn't new. Scientists in the 1880s discovered that a hollow cavity in an explosive creates a focused jet of superheated gas and molten metal. But nobody had made it work in a weapon this small and this cheap. Langweiler's team uses black powder, not modern propellants. Black powder is dirty, inefficient, creates massive smoke, but it's available. Germany's synthetic fuel programs are consuming every drop of nitrocellulose. Soldiers are supposed to hold the tube at arm's length and eyeball the shot. Accuracy is terrible. The odd mushroom shape of the warhead causes it to ricochet off sloped armor. Russian T-34s have those slopes. The weapon that's supposed to kill T-34s can't hit T-34s. Back to the drawing board. Simple flip-up sight. Redesigned warhead with a wider diameter and stabilizing fins. The tube is now 44 millimeters wide, made from low-grade steel that's barely a step above scrap metal. The warhead is 140 millimeters across, nearly 3 times the tube diameter. It looks ridiculous, a giant bulb stuck on a skinny stick, but it works. Penetration tests at Kummersdorf Proving Ground in March show the weapon can defeat 200 millimeters of armor at 30 meters. 20,000 are on order. Each Faustpatrone weighs 3.2 kilograms. Total length 98.5 centimeters. The warhead contains 400 grams of 50-50 TNT and hexogen mix. The tube holds 54 grams of black powder propellant. The projectile travels at just 30 meters per second. A man can sprint faster than this warhead flies. Any Sherman tank in the world has weaker armor than that on its sides and rear. Most Shermans have 76 millimeters on the front hull, 51 on the sides, 38 on the rear. A Panzerfaust 30 Klein can kill a Sherman from any angle, if the soldier can get within 30 meters. That's the catch. 30 meters, 98 feet. You can see the rivets on the tank from that range. You can hear the crew talking inside. If the tank has infantry support, they'll cut you down before you get the shot. If you miss, the tank's machine guns will find you. If you hit and the tank doesn't brew up immediately, the crew might bail out shooting. And even if everything goes perfectly, the backblast from the Panzerfaust is lethal up to 3 meters behind the fire. U.S. Army analysis confirms this. Stand in the wrong spot when you fire and your own weapon kills you. German troops in Russia start receiving Panzerfausts in autumn 1943. First reports are mixed. The weapon works when it works, but 30 meters is suicide range. Soldiers are requesting longer reach. Haseg is already developing it. The Panzerfaust, 30. Not Klein, just 30. Larger version, 5.1 kilograms. Tube diameter increased to 44 millimeters. Propellant charge up to 95 grams. Warhead now carries 800 grams of explosive. Penetration increases to 200 millimeters, but the range is still 30 meters. Same problem, different size. 200 millimeters of armor penetration maintained. The weapon weighs 6.1 kilograms. New improved sight with flip-up mechanism. Trigger mechanism redesigned for reliability. HASAG ramps up production. Target output 400,000 units per month. By October 1944, they're hitting that number. Over 6 million Panzerfausts are eventually produced across all variants. More than any other German anti-tank weapon. More than the Panzerschreck, which needs 2 men to operate. More than the Pak-40 anti-tank gun, which needs a crew of 6 and a tow vehicle. The Panzerfaust is a weapon of mass production for mass consumption. Any soldier can carry one, any soldier can fire one, any soldier can throw it away after use. June 6th, 1944, Normandy. Allied tanks are hitting the beaches. Within weeks, Sherman tanks are pushing into the bocage. The hedgerow country. Dense vegetation, narrow lanes, stone walls, small fields carved into a maze. Perfect Panzerfaust terrain. The weapon that struggled in the open steppes of Russia thrives in the claustrophobic landscapes of France. Not terrible. German anti-tank guns and German tanks themselves are doing most of the killing. But that 6% represents something new. Infantry with handheld weapons, trading kills with 70-ton war machines. A British report analyzing tank casualties in Northwest Europe from June 1944 through May 1945 breaks down the threats. Anti-tank guns, 22.7%. Self-propelled guns, 24.4%. German tanks, 14.5%. Mines, 22.1%. Bazooka-type weapons, meaning Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks, 14.2%. Other causes, 2.1%. 1 percentage point higher, German tanks that cost hundreds of thousands of Reichsmarks each, require trained crews, consume fuel Germany doesn't have, need spare parts Germany can't manufacture, versus a disposable tube that costs 20 Reichsmarks and can be used by a 15-year-old boy. 797 medium tanks and 101 light tanks in the sample. Panzerfausts and similar weapons inflicted 13% of tank losses, but caused 21% of crew casualties. The weapon is more lethal to people than to vehicles. When a Panzerfaust hits, the shaped charge jet doesn't just penetrate armor, it superheats everything in its path. The jet temperature exceeds 3,000 degrees Celsius. Metal, fabric, flesh, everything vaporizes. The pressure wave inside the tank is catastrophic. Eardrums burst, lungs collapse, and that's before the ammunition cooks off. Hits. A Panzerfaust has a 61% chance of starting a fire, lower than the 65% for artillery, but the soldier firing the Panzerfaust is aiming for weak spots. Track wheels, engine decks, ammunition storage, fuel tanks. He's 30 to 60 meters away. He can pick his shot. German forces are collapsing but fighting from prepared positions in towns and mountains. Panzerfaust casualties peak at 20 to 25% of all tank losses. Some pursuit operations on the Western Front see rates of 25 to 35%. In these scenarios, German forces have withdrawn traditional anti-tank guns. No fuel to move them, no horses to pull them, no crews left to man them. But Panzerfausts are everywhere. Cheap, light, deadly. The island has factories, still producing, even under Soviet artillery fire. The Manfred Weiss steel and metal works, making Panzerfausts and ammunition until Soviet soldiers are literally walking through the front door in the first days of January 1945. The siege of Budapest shows what Panzerfausts can do in urban combat. Soviet tank losses in the city are substantial. Exact numbers are disputed, but Soviet forces lose approximately 1,766 tanks and self-propelled guns in the entire Budapest operation from late October 1944 through mid-February 1945. Many to Panzerfausts fired from windows, doorways, rubble piles, basements. But Soviet reports tell a different story. A February 1945 report from the Second Ukrainian Front analyzing 160 instances of tank and self-propelled gun damage. Only 2 were caused by Panzerfausts, 0.5 to 0.6%. One T-34 had its track knocked off from 50 meters. Another T-34 was hit in the sloped side armor and developed a crack. Both shots from 50 meters. Neither tank was destroyed. The 89th Tank Brigade, operating in East Prussia in January and February 1945, lost 2 tanks and 1 self-propelled gun to Panzerfausts. 0 losses to Panzerschrecks or Offenrohr weapons. Easy targets for shaped charges. T-34s have sloped armor, 45 millimeters thick but angled at 60 degrees, giving effective thickness of 90 millimeters against perpendicular hits, and shaped charges lose effectiveness against slopes. The jet spreads, penetration decreases. Early Panzerfaust warheads were known to ricochet off T-34 armor. Infantry sitting on the back of tanks, jumping off to clear buildings before the tanks advance, suppressing fire from tank machine guns before entering streets, coordination with assault engineers. German defenders in Budapest and Berlin often get 1 shot before being obliterated by return fire. Tanks advance ahead of foot soldiers. German infantry and buildings wait for the tanks to pass, then hit them from behind. Panzerfaust teams set up in upper floor windows overlooking narrow roads, fire down through thinner top armor. The U.S. 82nd Airborne Division captures Panzerfausts in Sicily, more in Normandy. American paratroopers start using them instead of bazookas. The M1 bazooka has a 60mm warhead and needs 2 men. The Panzerfaust is 1 man, disposable, more powerful. Paratroopers drop into the Netherlands during Operation Market Garden carrying captured Panzerfausts. They find an ammunition dump near Nijmegen, more Panzerfausts. They use them through the Ardennes offensive until the war ends. Belgian city of Giel. Hills commands a Sherman, 3 other Shermans with him. Supporting infantry takes horrific casualties from MG-42 fire in the fields. Hills watches an officer get cut in half, machine gun belt across the chest. Hills is grateful to be inside steel. The Shermans silence the machine guns, advance into town. McWilliam jumps out, burning. Hills sees it happen 30 meters away. 2 minutes later, Hill's own tank is hit. Sheet of flame, shower of sparks. Shrapnel grazes his forehead, takes his beret. His driver, Bob Ingle, saw the German infantryman a second before he fired. Felt the blast on his legs, half a track plate shot away. Hole punched through the sprocket assembly into the differential. If they'd had a co-driver that day, he would have lost his legs or died. The tank can still move. Hills reverses into the main square, fires the Browning in the general direction of the shot. Survives. Not 88s, the invisible infantry weapon that strikes without warning. Luminous paint to make, counting easier in darkness, weight 6 kilograms. Armor penetration 220mm. This version can defeat the frontal armor of most Allied tanks if fired from the right angle. Still, Hausach produces approximately 100,000 Panzerfaust 100s between September 1944 and April 1945. Most never reach the front, stockpiled in depots that are captured or destroyed. 2-stage propellant ignition. Velocity increases to 85 meters per second. Range 150 meters. Penetration improved. Fragmentation sleeve available for anti-personnel use. The weapon can be reloaded. Strip of ignition caps allows up to 10 shots before fouling makes the tube unusable. Approximately 100,000 units manufactured. Almost none issued to troops beyond limited trials. No known examples survive the war. The PaK-40 anti-tank gun, 23,000 units. The Tiger tank, 1,347. The Panther, 6,000 units. Germany made more Panzerfausts than tanks, anti-tank guns, and rocket launchers combined. An MG-42 machine gun cost 250 Reichsmarks. A Panzer IV tank cost 115,962 Reichsmarks. A Tiger cost 299,800 Reichsmarks. For the price of 1 Tiger tank, Germany could produce roughly 15,000 Panzerfausts. Each Panzerfaust had a realistic chance of knocking out a tank. A Tiger had to survive long enough to shoot 15,000 times to justify its cost. It's not a strategy for winning the war, it's a strategy for making the Allies pay in blood for every street. Even if the tank is repairable, it's off the battlefield for days or weeks. The Dupuy study notes that for every tank loss, an average of 1 crewman is killed or wounded. 13% of losses, but 21% of casualties. Panzerfausts are killing tankers faster than they're killing tanks. Standoff mesh screens suspended away from the hull to detonate shaped charges prematurely. In October 1944, British tests show that metallic mesh stops 3 out of 4 Panzerfaust 30 shots at 30 yards, but it doesn't work against Panzerfaust 60s. The mesh tears off on rough terrain, gets caught in turret rings and jams rotation. Churchill tank trials end in April 1945 because the war is nearly over. Americans try plastic blocks filled with aluminum shavings or gravel, 3.5 to 5 inches thick, ineffective. Don't even stop a bazooka shot on Sherman side armor. September 1945. Tests with glass bead-filled plastic are promising, but the war's been over for 4 months. Another solution is spikes, long metal rods projecting from the hull to deform warheads before they detonate properly. Tests in May 1945. Results are poor. Low-velocity projectiles detonate as soon as they touch the spike. No time for deformation. The war ends before any of these solutions are implemented widely. Commanders learn that sitting still in urban terrain is death. A stationary tank is a dead tank. Keep moving. Keep the infantry close. Watch the upper floors. They desperately need weapons that can kill T-34s and IS-2s. The manual included with finished deliveries shows aim points on Soviet T-34s and American Shermans. Yes, Shermans, because Soviets are using Lend-Lease Shermans on the Finnish front. The continuation war ends in September 1944. Finland signs an armistice. The remaining Panzerfausts go into storage. The Finnish military notes that training is needed. Soldiers are having accidents, too many accidents. Finland develops its own training weapon, the Harjoitus Käsipatruna, practice fist cartridge, recycled Panzerfaust 30 tubes with new firing mechanisms, inert warheads. Allows safe training without wasting combat weapons. Technical problems limit production. They switched to Soviet RPG-2s, but the attempt shows the design's influence. American M72 Law, Swedish at 4, all descendants of the Panzerfaust concept. Disposable tube, shaped charge, infantry portable anti-armor. Literally, light tank fist, 44mm lance, a spiritual successor, later replaced by the Panzerfaust 3 in the 1980s and 90s. The Panzerfaust 3 is sophisticated, reusable fire control unit, disposable tube, computer-assisted sights, tandem warheads to defeat reactive armor, range 600 meters with advanced optics, cost over $10,000 per unit. Nothing like the original 20 Reichsmark stamped steel tube, but it carries the name, Tank Fist. The legacy endures. Why did a cheap German tube destroy more tanks than any Allied cannon? Because numbers matter. Because availability matters. Because you can't shoot what you don't have. The American 76mm gun on a late model Sherman could penetrate a Panther's frontal armor at 500 yards. In theory. In practice, how many Shermans got clean shots at Panthers from 500 yards in Normandy bocage? How many Tiger kills came from frontal penetration versus side shots or mechanical breakdown or air attack? You need courage in 30 meters of distance. That number appears in multiple sources but lacks hard documentation. More reliable figures put Panzerfaust casualties between 6% in Normandy to 34% in late war urban fighting. Even at the lower end, 6%? That's one tank in 17. On a battlefield with thousands of tanks, that's hundreds destroyed by disposable tubes. At 34%, it's one tank in 3, a staggering toll. But raw percentages miss the psychological impact. Allied tank crews knew about Tigers. They knew about 88s. Those were threats you could see, identify, avoid, or engage. The Panzerfaust was invisible until the flash. Could come from any window, any pile of rubble, any basement, any hedgerow. You couldn't avoid it because you couldn't see it until too late. That psychological burden weighs on crews, makes them hesitant, slows advances, gets people killed when they freeze instead of moving. Some believed it, some died trying. Some succeeded and died anyway when return fire obliterated their positions. The calculus is brutal, but Nazi Germany in 1945 is running on brutal calculus. Better blind than dead. Infantry clears buildings before tanks approach. Combat engineers use explosives to collapse structures that might hide anti-tank teams. Fighter bombers strafe suspected positions. None of it eliminates the threat. All of it reduces casualties. Suppress anti-tank teams, then remount and continue. It's dangerous for the infantry. Machine gun and artillery fire can sweep them off the tanks. But it's more dangerous to let Panzerfaust teams get close. The Soviets accept infantry casualties to protect armor. Ruthless, effective. Heavy artillery preparation on urban areas, smoke screens during advances, overwhelming fire on any building that might conceal defenders. The 8 Guards Army report from late March, investigating losses during attempts to widen the foothold across the Oder, mentions Panzerfausts in passing. Of 122 lost tanks and self-propelled guns, only 7 were taken out by Panzerfausts. 98 lost to artillery and tanks. 15 to mines, 2 to aircraft. The Panzerfaust is a threat, but not the primary threat on the Eastern Front by this stage. German artillery is being silenced by counter-battery fire and airstrikes, but Panzerfausts just need soldiers willing to use them. Germany has plenty of desperate soldiers in April 1945. Flamethrower tanks burn out buildings. Progress measured in meters per day. 7,000 civilian casualties. The city is destroyed to be saved. Panzerfausts contribute to the cost. Every intersection is a kill zone. Panzerfausts are distributed by the thousands. Hitler Youth members as young as 12 are firing them. Old men with First World War medals hold tubes and die in rubble. Soviet tank losses in Berlin approach 1,000 units. Not all to Panzerfausts, but the weapon contributes. Drivers panic when entering narrow streets. Commanders request flamethrower tanks to clear buildings before advancing. The fear is real. The weapon works. But by late April, the outcome is inevitable. No amount of Panzerfausts can stop 3 million Soviet soldiers. The question is only how many die before surrender. Exact number uncertain because records are incomplete or destroyed. Post-war, Allied intelligence surveys try to count them. Captured stockpiles. Production figures from interrogated managers. Factory records from HASAG facilities. The number keeps changing depending on source. 6 million? 7 million? 8.4 million? Every estimate agrees on one thing. It was the most produced German anti-tank weapon of the war, by a massive margin. Cost-effectiveness analysis. If a Panzerfaust cost 20 Reichsmarks and Germany made 8 million, total production cost is 160 million Reichsmarks. Approximately $64 million in 1944 exchange rates. The US produced over 88,000 tanks during the war. If Panzerfausts destroyed even 1% of that, 880 tanks, at a production cost of roughly $73 per kill. Even at higher loss rates, 10%, 8,800 tanks, the cost is $730 per kill. A Sherman cost $44,000 to build. A Churchill cost over $50,000. The return on investment for Germany is astronomical in purely economic terms. The Allied tankers burned alive, the families who received telegrams, the cities destroyed in fighting, the trauma that survivors carried for decades, Stuart Hill's nightmares, the Soviet tankers who refused to enter streets without infantry, the German veterans who couldn't talk about what they did in the last months of the war. A weapon that solved a critical tactical problem with minimal resources. On the other hand, it's a symbol of Nazi Germany's willingness to sacrifice its own people in a lost cause. Hitler Youth with Panzerfausts in Berlin were not soldiers. They were children handed weapons and told to fight tanks. That's not courage, that's desperation weaponized. When you see kids and old men with Panzerfausts, you're fighting an enemy that's already lost. The question is only how much more blood gets spilled before they accept it. Every Panzerfaust fired in April 1945 was a waste. The war was over. Germany was beaten. Soviet and American forces were going to occupy Berlin and meet at the Elbe regardless. The Panzerfausts didn't change that. They just added to the body count. Post-war analysis tried to quantify effectiveness. British report WO 291/1186. American studies from 1st and 3rd Armies, Soviet after-action reports all agree on basic facts. Panzerfausts were effective in specific conditions: urban terrain, close range, ambush scenarios, poorly trained crews or unsupported tanks. In open terrain with combined arms and experienced crews, the weapon's impact decreased dramatically. Soviet reports from 1945 show this clearly. As Red Army tactics evolved, Panzerfaust casualties dropped to negligible levels. Every future conflict studies what the Panzerfaust did in 1944 and 45. Vietnam. American troops face RPG ambushes in jungle and urban terrain. Same problems. Invisible infantry with shoulder-fired weapons. Lessons from Panzerfaust combat informed tactics. Afghanistan, Soviet tanks in Kabul. RPG, 7 teams in buildings. The echoes are obvious. Iraq, American armor in Fallujah. Shaped charges from windows and rooftops. The Panzerfaust's descendants are still killing tanks 80 years later. Armor became vulnerable to infantry in ways it hadn't been before. Tactics had to change. Doctrine had to adapt. Training had to emphasize cooperation and situational awareness. Tank crews couldn't assume infantry were harmless anymore. Penetration 140 to 220 millimeters. Killed thousands of Allied tanks. Caused thousands of crew casualties. Used extensively in Normandy, Italy, Eastern Front, Germany. Adopted by Finland, Hungary, Italian Social Republic. Captured and used by American, British, Soviet, and Polish forces. Influenced every post-war disposable anti-tank weapon design. Still killing tanks in descendant form in Ukraine today. The Panzerfaust wasn't the best weapon Germany made. The 88mm gun was more accurate, the Tiger was more powerful, the Panther was more mobile. But the Panzerfaust was the most effective infantry anti-tank weapon Germany deployed because effectiveness isn't just about performance. It's about availability times performance divided by cost. On that equation, nothing Germany made came close. 20 Reichsmarks bought a weapon that could kill a $44,000 tank from 30 meters. The math is brutal. The results are documented. The legacy is undeniable. But it made damn sure the Allies paid in blood for victory. Every Sherman that burned, every Churchill that brewed up, every T-34 that took a hit in the side and didn't come home. Somewhere in the accounting, a Panzerfaust was responsible. 20 Reichsmarks. The cheapest, deadliest, most effective anti-tank weapon of World War II. The tank fist that punched through steel and changed warfare forever. The real story isn't in the specifications or the production numbers, it's in the archives. After-action reports from units that lost multiple tanks in a single engagement to unseen threats. Interrogation records of captured German soldiers who describe firing Panzerfausts from cellars while buildings collapsed around them. Letters from Allied tankers who describe the fear of moving through German towns. Soviet operational analyses that document evolving tactics to counter the threat. Cost accounting records from HASAG showing how they ramped production to industrial scale. Hospital records of burn victims from tank fires. All of it pointing to the same conclusion. The Panzerfaust mattered. Not because it was sophisticated, because it was simple, not because it was expensive, because it was cheap, not because it won the war, because it made winning more costly. The recoilless principle, the disposable philosophy, all lifted from Langweiler's work. The weapon that couldn't save Nazi Germany became the blueprint for Soviet anti-tank infantry weapons for the next 40 years. The Panzerfaust died in May 1945. Its descendants are still fighting. That's the legacy, not victory, influence. The cheap German tube that changed how infantry fights armor, forever.